Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. I've worked as a cook at a 24-hour diner in Florida for about 3 years now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills, and I've always been more of a night owl anyway. The night shift has its ups and downs. Sometimes it's dead quiet, and other times you get weirdos stumbling in at 3 a.m., drunk or high, looking for greasy food to soak up whatever's in their system. But this one night, I'll never forget. It started like any other shift. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed an apron, and got to work. The usual customers trickled in. Truckers grabbing coffee, a couple of college kids cramming for finals over a plate of pancakes, and a few regulars who seemed to just want company more than food. Around 1 a.m., the flow died down, and the only people left were my coworker Jenny, who was running the counter, and a guy passed out in a corner booth. I decided to step outside for a smoke break. It was a muggy Florida night, the kind where the air feels like it's sticking to your skin. The alley behind the diner is where I always go to smoke. It's quiet, and you can't see much except for a dumpster and the faint glow of the street lights at the end of the block. I leaned against the wall, lit up my cigarette, and exhaled, letting the nicotine do its thing. That's when I saw him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just a shadowy figure at the edge of the alley, standing where the light from the street lamp faded into darkness. He wasn't moving, just standing there, kind of hunched over, like he was trying to stay out of sight, but still watching me. I figured it was just some random guy passing through, so I ignored him and kept smoking, but he didn't leave. I glanced at him again, trying not to make it obvious that I was watching him. He was still there, still staring, or at least I think he was staring. It was hard to tell because his face was mostly hidden in shadow. Something about the way he stood made my skin crawl. It wasn't normal. It was like he was too still, almost like a statue. I stubbed out my cigarette and turned to head back inside, but something made me stop. I don't know why, I just had this overwhelming feeling that if I turned my back on him, something bad would happen. "Hey man, you okay?" I called out, trying to sound casual but firm. No response. "Look, if you need something, the diner's open, but you can't just hang out there, all right?" Still nothing. He didn't move, didn't say a word, just stood there like he was glued to the spot. My heart started to race. I dealt with my fair share of weirdos on this job, but this guy, something about him was different. Dangerous. I decided to head back inside. Jenny was at the counter, scrolling through her phone. "Hey, there's some guy out back," I said, trying to sound calm. "He's just standing there, not saying anything. Kinda creepy." Jenny looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Probably just some homeless dude. Happens all the time. He'll move along." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept glancing at the back door, half expecting him to burst through it at any moment. About 10 minutes later, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and told Ginny I was going to check it out. "Be careful," she said, her voice laced with concern. I stepped outside, shining the flashlight into the alley. At first, I didn't see anything, and for a second I thought maybe he'd left. But then the beam of light caught something. A pair of eyes reflecting back at me from the shadows. He was still there, crouched now, like some kind of predator waiting to pounce. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice louder this time. "I'm calling the cops." That's when he moved. He lunged out of the darkness, and I saw what he was holding. A wrench. Big and rusty, like something he'd pulled out of a junkyard. He was fast, faster than I expected, and before I could react, he was right in front of me. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the flashlight at him and bolted for the door. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. Somehow, I made it inside and slammed the door shut just as he reached it. Jenny screamed as I locked the deadbolt, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn the latch. "He's got a wrench," I guessed. "Call the cops." Jenny grabbed the phone and dialed 911, while I pressed my back against the door, praying he wouldn't break it down. By the time the cops arrived, the guy was gone. They found the wrench lying in the alley, along with some other stuff. A torn backpack, an old blanket, and a bunch of random junk. One of the officers recognized the description I gave of the guy. "We've dealt with him before," he said. "Homeless guy, violent tendencies. He's been arrested a few times for assault." I couldn't believe it. If I hadn't gotten back inside when I did, who knows what he would have done to me. I still think about that night every time I step outside for a smoke break. I don't know if he's still out there, but one thing's for sure. I'll never feel safe in that alley again. I've worked some crappy jobs before, but nothing comes close to what happened when I was working the night shift at a small motel in Florida. I took the job because it was easy money, and honestly, I didn't have much else going for me at the time. I wasn't afraid of working nights either. I figured most of the time I'd just be sitting behind the counter, scrolling on my phone, maybe checking in a guest or two, but looking back, I should have walked out of that place the moment I saw it. The motel wasn't in a great area. It sat just off a quiet stretch of highway, and most of our guests were either truckers passing through or people who didn't want to be found. The building was old, the kind of place that looked decent enough from the outside, but had peeling wallpaper and that stale, musty smell in the rooms. Still, the owner didn't seem to care about appearances, as long as people paid cash, and didn't complain. I'd been working there for about 2 months when the night in question happened. It started off like any other shift. I came in at 10 p.m., swapped out with the day receptionist, and settled in for the long night ahead. My job was simple: check in late arrivals, answer the phone if anyone called, which was rare, and keep an eye on the security cameras. The cameras covered the lobby, the parking lot, and the hallways, but not the rooms themselves. Though, honestly, I didn't want to know what went on in those rooms anyway. Around midnight, the motel got quiet. There were maybe 6 guests checked in, and none of them had come out of their rooms since I started my shift. I was sitting behind the counter, scrolling through Reddit on my phone, when I saw movement on one of the security screens. At first, I thought it was just one of the guests heading to their car, but when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't. The man on the screen wasn't heading for the parking lot. He was walking around the side of the building, near the back office. The back office was where we kept supplies and some of the paperwork. It was also where the safe was, though only the owner and the day receptionist knew the combination. I leaned closer to the monitor, trying to get a better look at the guy. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. There was something off about the way he moved, slow and deliberate, like he didn't want to be noticed. My stomach tightened as I watched him stop at the back office door, At first, he just stood there, looking around like he was making sure no one was watching. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and shiny. It took me a second to realize it was a lockpick. My heart started racing. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call the cops right away, but what if I was wrong? What if he was just a guest who'd locked himself out of his room and was trying to get back in? I didn't want to make a scene over nothing, but as I kept watching, it became clear he wasn't trying to get into a room. He was trying to break into the office. I grabbed the phone and dialed the owner's number. He was the kind of guy who hated being bothered outside of business hours, but I didn't know who else to call. The phone rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. I was about to hang up and call the police when the man on the screen suddenly looked up, straight at the camera. I froze. For a moment, it felt like he was staring right at me, even though I knew he couldn't see me through the screen. Then he smiled, a slow, creepy smile that sent chills down my spine, and gave the camera a little wave. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even think straight. The guy on the camera didn't stop smiling. He just stood there for a few seconds, watching the camera like he was daring me to do something. Then he turned back to the door and started working on the lock again, like he wasn't worried at all. I picked the phone back up and forced myself to dial 911. My voice came out shaky when the operator answered. I told her there was a man trying to break into the back office of the motel where I worked. She asked for the address and if I was alone. I gave her the details and told her I was the only one there. She said officers were on their way and told me to stay somewhere safe. Somewhere safe. Where was I supposed to go? The lobby was wide open, with big glass windows that anyone could see through. There was no lock on the office door where I was sitting, and even if there was, I didn't think it would do much good if the guy decided to come inside. I couldn't leave the desk either. I needed to see what he was doing on the cameras. By the time I looked back at the screen, he had the door open. He slipped inside and I lost sight of him. The back office wasn't covered by the cameras, so I had no idea what he was doing in there. My mind started racing. What if he found the safe? What if he was looking for something else? Something worse? I tried to stay calm, but every second felt like an hour. The sound of my own breathing was so loud it felt like it was echoing off the walls. Then I heard it, a faint creak, like a door opening. Not from the back office. It came from the hallway behind the lobby. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen anyone on the cameras near the hallway. How did he get in? I grabbed the pepper spray we kept under the counter. It wasn't much, but it was the only weapon I had. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I stayed crouched behind the desk, clutching the pepper spray, and listened. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. The hallway was just out of view of the front desk, but I could see the edge of the wall. A shadow appeared there first, stretching out long and thin across the floor. Then he stepped into view. It was the man from the cameras. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was blank, almost calm, but his eyes were sharp and focused, locked right on me. He didn't say a word. He just started walking toward the desk, one slow step at a time. I stood up, holding the pepper spray in front of me like a shield. "Don't come any closer," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "The cops are on their way." He didn't stop. He didn't even blink. I backed up until I hit the wall behind me. There was nowhere else to go. My hand tightened around the pepper spray, my finger hovering over the trigger. "Look," I said. my voice cracking. "You don't want to do this. Just leave now and I won't say anything. Just go." He finally stopped. For a second, I thought maybe he'd listen. But then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. It wasn't big, but it looked sharp, and the way he held it made my blood run cold. I didn't wait for him to make the first move. I pressed the trigger on the pepper spray and aimed it right at his face. He stumbled back, swearing and rubbing at his eyes. I didn't stick around to see what he'd do next. I ran. There was only one place to go, the storage room at the end of the hallway. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the bolt into place. The storage room was small and cramped, full of shelves and cleaning supplies. There was no way out except the door I'd just come through. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear where he was. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped right outside the storage room. My heart felt like it was going to explode. He tried the doorknob. When it didn't budge, he started banging on the door, hard enough to rattle it in its frame. "You can't stay in there forever," he said, his voice low and calm, like we were having a casual conversation. "You're just making this harder on yourself." I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just prayed the cops would get there soon. The banging stopped, and for a second, I thought he'd given up. But then I heard a scraping sound, like metal against wood. He was trying to pry the door open. Just when I thought the door was going to give, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Sirens. They were faint at first, but they got louder fast. The man must have heard them too, because the scraping stopped. I waited, holding my breath, until I heard voices in the hallway. Loud, authoritative voices. "Police! Drop the weapon!" When I finally opened the door, the man was on the ground, face down, with 2 officers kneeling on top of him. They found the knife in his pocket, along with zip ties and duct tape. I don't even want to think about what he was planning to do with those. The cops told me later that he was a wanted criminal, suspected of several break-ins and assaults in the area. They said I was lucky I got away, and they were right. I quit the job the next day. No amount of easy money is worth going through that again. Working the night shift at a small convenience store in Florida wasn't the most exciting job, but it was easy and it paid enough to keep me afloat. The place was tucked away on the edge of a quiet road, surrounded by nothing but a gas station and a strip of fast food joints that closed early. Most nights were uneventful. A few regulars stopped by for their midnight snacks or cigarettes, and the rest of the time I was left with the hum of the refrigerators and the glow of my phone screen. That night felt no different, at least at first. It was a Wednesday, and the store had been dead for hours. By 11 p.m., I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through social media, fighting off the boredom and the creeping drowsiness. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me, and the occasional clink from the ice machine in the back was the only sound breaking the silence. Then I heard it. A faint tapping noise. At first I thought it was the AC unit. It's old and temperamental, prone to making weird noises, especially at night. I ignored it and kept scrolling. But then the tapping came again, louder this time. I glanced up, my heart giving a little jump. The sound was coming from the large glass window near the entrance, the one that overlooked the parking lot. I could feel a chill creeping up my spine, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a bird, or a branch blowing in the wind. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I set my phone down and walked toward the window, trying to peer out into the night. The parking lot was mostly empty, dimly lit by a single street lamp that flickered every few seconds. I could make out the gas station across the street, its pumps sitting unused under their bright canopy. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but then, just beyond the reach of the street lamp's glow, I saw him. A man. He was standing completely still, just a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the trees lining the lot. I couldn't make out his face or what he was wearing, but the way he stood there, motionless, sent a chill through me. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound confident even though my voice wavered. "Do you need something?" He didn't say anything. I waited a few seconds, my pulse quickening. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, just enough for the faint light to catch him. He was wearing a hoodie, the drawstring pulled tight around his face. And then I saw it. A mask. Not a fancy one, just one of those plain white expressionless masks you see around Halloween. Something about it made my stomach twist. "Listen, man, you're creeping me out," I said, stepping back from the window. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." He didn't say anything. Instead, he raised his hand and started tapping on the glass again. I took another step back, my heart hammering in my chest. My hand went to my pocket, fumbling for my phone. "You're not funny," I shouted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Get out of here." He didn't move. He just kept tapping, the sound echoing in the quiet store. Then, without warning, he leaned his head against the glass, tilting it slightly as if he was trying to look past the reflection and see inside. That's when I realized he wasn't just messing around. He wasn't a prankster or some drunk looking for trouble. There was something wrong with him. I backed away further, nearly tripping over a stack of boxes behind the counter. My fingers shook as I unlocked my phone and dialed 911. Before I could hit the call button, the tapping stopped. I glanced up, and for a moment I thought he was gone, but then there was a loud smash. The glass window shattered, shards flying everywhere, and the man jumped through the opening. Time seemed to slow down. I dropped my phone and scrambled backward as he came toward me. His movements were quick, almost frantic, and I could hear the crunch of broken glass under his shoes. I ran for the counter, my only thought being to hit the alarm button. My hand fumbled underneath the register, searching desperately for the button I knew was there. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder as he grabbed me, pulling me back. I twisted and managed to break free, my adrenaline kicking in. I slammed my hand on the alarm button, and the piercing sound of the store alarm filled the air. The man froze, his head jerking toward the sound. For a moment, he looked almost confused, like he hadn't expected it. Then he turned and bolted toward the broken window. But he wasn't fast enough. The glass had jagged edges, and as he tried to climb through, his hoodie got caught. He struggled, trying to free himself, but the more he moved, the more he got tangled. The police arrived within minutes, though it felt like an eternity. They pulled him out of the window and cuffed him right there in the parking lot. I found out later that he had a history of breaking into businesses at night, though he'd never been caught before. The mask was his way of hiding his identity, but he'd slipped up this time. As for me, I quit the job the next day. I couldn't bring myself to step foot in that store again, not after what happened. Even now, months later, I still have nightmares about that mask and the sound of glass shattering in the dead of night. Sometimes, I think about how differently things could have gone if I hadn't hit that alarm in time. It's a thought I try not to dwell on, but it lingers, always in the back of my mind. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.